Tony Gwynn arrived in San Diego in 1977 for his freshman year at San Diego State and chose to not ever leave. Until he was taken from us, it really goes without saying, much sooner than we wanted or ever imagined. Tony Gwynn died early in the morning of June 16th. He was 54 years old. Cancer, the one adversary he could not figure out a way to best. Tony, Mr. Padre. That was a designation with which he was uncomfortable, but which was entirely appropriate and would fit no other person. Tony played 20 seasons for the Padres, with such excellence, of course, that he was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 2007, the first year he was eligible. During his career, Tony signed no fewer than 6 contracts with the Padres, in many of those instances forsaking the promise of more riches elsewhere. He was comfortable here. He loved it here, loved San Diego almost as much as San Diego loved him. Even before he retired as a player in 2001, Tony was hired as baseball coach at his alma mater, SDSU, to coach in the stadium that had already been named for him. It was a job he cherished and a job he held for the rest of his life. Given all that time here, there may be very little you don't know about Tony Gwynn, but you can never hear too many stories about greatness. Among those who chronicled Tony's life and times were UT San Diego sports writers. We bring you now some of their recollections of arguably the most cherished figure our city has ever known or ever will know.
There's certain people in life that people really gravitate to, and I think Tony Gwynn had the greatest gravitational pull of anyone I've ever seen. It started from his greatness on the field, obviously all the batting titles and everything he accomplished that, you know, will join all the greats. But it was more than that because he stayed in San Diego for 20 years.
One of the many amazing things about Tony was his ability to not get stumped by anybody. I mean, you could see it in the way pitchers were always trying to challenge Tony, always trying to figure out some way to get the ball past him, trying to fool him. You could not fool Tony Gwynn. You couldn't surprise him in any way. I don't know if the guy was ever surprised by anything in his life. Well, we had the same challenge as writers who spent a lot of time around Tony. So the challenge became to ask a question where Tony went, I don't know. I don't know, you stumped me. And my first question was, Tony, so what do you think of the new Clinton tax plan? Immediately, like that, Tony goes, oh man, my dad and I were just talking about this last night. My dad said, we need to tax the corporations more. We need to tax the corporations more. I said, Dad, I am a corporation. And it strikes me now that I've been thinking back to these kind of stories, that I wish more corporations were like Tony. I wish they had learned something from a corporation like Tony on how to treat people.
Everybody who's been in a major league clubhouse knows how the clubhouse guys come around and they pick up the shoes, they shine the players' shoes and stuff. Tony Gwynn, throughout his career, always shined his own shoes. Never gave them to the clubhouse kids. Early in his career, he talked about how his dad, Charles, visited him in the clubhouse. And Charles saw the clubhouse guys picking up the shoes of the players. He goes, what's that all about? Tony says, oh, they shine the shoes for us. And his dad said, no, you shine your own shoes. They're your shoes, you shine them. And Tony says, he looked at his dad and sort of smiled, and he says, this isn't funny. And Tony said from that point forward, he made a habit of always doing his own shoes.
He treated everybody great. He always had time for you. Even when he didn't have time for you, he had time for you. And I never saw him turn anybody away. I know there were times when he didn't want to talk about something. I'd have some idea of something, and he'd say, I don't want to talk about that. And before long, he'd be talking about it. That's just the way it was.
One thing I think he just loved talking baseball. Some of it I don't know if we'll ever figure out, because he could meet somebody for 5 minutes and you'd think they'd been best friends for years. He just enjoyed talking, from a starting point, talking baseball. And then that would lead into other discussions about all kinds of things.
Tony and I are sitting in the cubicle, or in front of this cubicle at Qualcomm, and he's thinking about a couple nicknames he had just read in history, and he asked me what my favorite nicknames were, and I gave him a couple that I really liked from the past. And turns to Ricky Henderson. He says, Ricky, what's your all-time favorite baseball nickname? Ricky looked up at him and he goes, Ricky. And Tony laughed so hard he sort of fell backwards on his stool, bumped his head. And it was that laugh that we all remember with Tony. And that laugh, there was nothing fake to it. That laugh came from his soul.
It's one thing to watch a guy hit an incredible home run at Yankee Stadium in front of 70,000 people in a national audience. But the good stuff was when it was just you and him and you were just talking, and he just enthralled you with his personality, with his kindness.
I stopped in on him unannounced at San Diego State, and he was collecting all this stuff. He had some Padres jerseys and balls and other memorabilia, some Aztec stuff, and he was signing it, and he's putting together like this memorabilia goodie bag. And I said, "What's all that stuff for?" So then he goes on to tell me how he had met this woman at a card show signing or autograph signing in Iowa, and she said how she had grown up in San Diego, moved to Iowa, but she's a lifelong Padres fan, and she can't wait to get back to town to go on a tour of Petco Park because she hasn't been in town since it opened. And he gives her like a throwaway comment, "Well, when you get into town, look me up and I'll give you a tour." And it's just one of those things you say. But about 6 months later, it's in the winter, and he gets a phone call in his office, and it's that woman, and she goes, "Hey, we're in town, we're ready for that tour." And he's just caught off guard because they've got practice that day, but you could tell he felt so obligated because he had made that statement that he was putting all this together. And I rode down with him to give it to her, and of course she knows nothing about this. We get out of the car, and as we're walking up, her tour group is right there, just about to go on their tour, and all of a sudden she sees him, and she's just totally doesn't know what to do, and she just gets overwhelmed. She can't control any of her emotions. She hugs him. You know, she's just beside herself, and he's like, "I'm sorry, I got practice, some obligations, I can't take you on the tour, but I brought this for you." And everybody's watching this, and she's just, you know, it's this moment that obviously she will tell for the rest of her life.
1998 in the World Series, everyone's watching. So it was gratifying for him to have this opportunity and come through. And because it had been 14 years, he was very determined to enjoy every second of all the pregame hoopla. And he was like a greeter sitting in the dugout. Whoever came by, he would smile and shout out their name and tell them stories. And you just haven't seen anyone more excited for something other than maybe children on Christmas Day. That really is how he was.
He's in Chicago, and the Cub fans were always all over him. And he said he's out there one day in right field, and the sun's a little bright, so he's got these wraparound sunglasses. And he says every once in a while in a baseball game, you can hear a fan who's on you. And all of a sudden he hears this voice, and he goes, "Hey, Gwynn, I got it. You're one of those Ninja Turtles. You got the big behind, you got the big stomach, and you got that funny looking thing on your face." And Tony said he's leaning over and he's trying hard not to laugh, but he's looking out of the corner of his eye, and he can see the guy. He can see the guy along the low rail at Wrigley Field. So he says, the inning ends, and I just make a beeline for the guy. He says, I'm running as fast as I can toward this guy, and the guy sees me coming, and security sees it, and they're coming down from both sides and down out of the stands because they think there's going to be a confrontation. He says, I get to that low rail, I reach out my hand, and I go, "Hey, that's one of the best ones ever." And he says, I shake his hand, and he says, I take off running for the dugout. And he says, I wanted to turn around and look at the guy and see what the reaction was. He says, but I knew if I looked back, it would ruin everything. So I just kept running. And he always was wondering what happened to that guy. And you know, it's one of his favorite memories. And I always loved that about Tony. He could take things that weren't the 5-hit games, that weren't 4-for-5s, and he could remember all the small things.
I covered Tony from the day he stepped on the campus in 1977. I was Aztec beat writer then. And he just played basketball his freshman year because Tim Vesey, the coach then, wouldn't allow him to play baseball. I think it was Tony's second to the last game his senior year, and they played El Paso here, UTEP, and UTEP was really good. And San Diego State played them, wasn't very good, but they played them tough. And it was a 2-point game. It was before the 3-point shot. And Gwynn came down the court with time running out and launched a 50-plus foot shot and nailed it, just nailed it. And the refs waved it off, said it came after the buzzer. Well, Smokey Gaines was coach then, he goes completely nuts, screaming, you know. And so I go up to Tony, and Tony said, I didn't beat the buzzer. You know, his coach is going crazy saying he did, and Tony said, nah, I didn't beat the buzzer. And that was Tony.
There's a story in a Salt Lake newspaper about how Danny Ainge was the greatest two-sport letterman ever to come out of the Western Athletic Conference. And Tony saw it, and he was just like, what? and he would laugh about it. Well, I sent away, and I got like 5 copies of that paper, and about once a week or once a homestand, I'd roll one of those things up and I'd stick it in his mailbox, and he'd look at it and he'd go, where'd this come from? And he'd start laughing because, you know, and he knew who was doing it, and we had a lot of fun with that. But that's the thing, Tony loved being ribbed as much as he loved laughing and ribbing other people.
He used to love to stump us. We'd sit down with him and things would get real comfortable, and Tony'd go, so Barry Bonds, Hall of Fame? And I'd go, Tony, I don't know. I got the vote, but I don't think I can bring myself to do it. And Tony's like, how can you not put Barry Bonds in? How can you not do this? And the left hand would start moving too. He'd start getting like this. He'd go, how can you not? I mean, look at his numbers. Look what he said. Look what he did before all this. How can you not put Barry? And all of a sudden you're like, holy smokes. And you're backing up on the guy, and that's the way he wanted it. That's exactly the way he wanted it.
He was unique. He was brilliant. Tony got it. And a lot of guys don't get it and still don't get it, but he knew more than God. You can go around baseball now and find full locker rooms that don't know as much as he knew. He was a brilliant guy. Recently
I went into the Pittsburgh Pirates locker room, and I just went up to Andrew McCutchen, the reigning most valuable player. And Andrew's only like mid-20s, and I dropped the name Tony Gwynn. And I said, what do you know about, what can you tell me about Tony Gwynn? He goes, honestly, I can't say I saw him play a lot. I grew up in Florida. I was really young when he was playing, but I know about the video. And at that point, he pointed over to the middle of the visiting locker room at Petco, and there were a bank of like 5 or 6 laptops there. And there was a player in front of every laptop sitting there, clicking, 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 studying that day's pitcher. And McCutchen said, he started that. He was the guy who taught everybody how to make yourself better, how to show somebody the little things or even the big things that you can do to make yourself better.
One of the things in the last few months, the last time I talked to him, I said, I really want to see you get better because I have a lot of questions about if you would have batted 400. And he said, well, he in the past has said that he thinks he would have, but I never got that chance to ask those questions. And then I came to realize, you know what, he was going to be gone too soon no matter what, because I will always have more questions for Tony Gwynn. There always will be more questions.
I'd like to say, hey, I remember this game when he got 5 hits. I don't remember that as much as just being with this truly unique and wonderful human being.
His 3,141 hits are the 19th most in Major League history. His .338 career batting average tied for 18th highest ever. It's the highest among anyone who played after 1960. An 8-time National League batting champion, a 15-time All-Star, a first ballot Hall of Famer, with 97.6% of the vote, by the way, 7th highest anyone has ever received. And to understand that his legacy was more about what a wonderful person he was, that should be a life-altering realization for the rest of us. A man who set the standard for work ethic at his very public vocation, who made hitting a craft, an art, and a science. At the same time, a man who didn't take himself too seriously, didn't place himself above others. A part of what San Diego was and should aspire to still be is gone. We are thankful for the memories.